Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is exactly 29 after 9 o'clock. This is News and Views on Salam Media, the second hour of the program. Thank you for staying with us. Next, we'll be talking with Brooks Spector. He is the associate editor at the Daily Maverick. We're going to be talking about the Russia-Africa summit and very especially, of course, the grain deal. Brooks Spector, very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
And you.
Okay, so we seeing headlines suggesting that African leaders have left Russia without the grain deal or a path to end the war in the Ukraine. I didn't think for 1 minute that when this summit happened, that there was going to be any inroads as far as the war is concerned. But I was hopeful about the grain deal, the Black Sea. The grain deal. I just thought that common sense would prevail and they would be able to clinch that issue. What are your thoughts? What have you been seeing, reading, and analyzing?
Well, first of all, let's paint a little bit of the backdrop. The Russians had hoped that they would have representatives from every country in Africa, and in this regard, they were rather sorely disabused of it because ultimately, 16, 17 countries showed up, which is significantly fewer than the number of countries that attended their first effort in Sochi, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And that set a certain tenor to the discussion right from the start. I think that there was a certain amount of dissatisfaction with the way the Russians were conducting their relationship with the continent A, and they're continuing to carry on the war against Ukraine, and also the rather uh, hard-edged, ham-fisted way that they were using the power of food commodities as a tool, as a weapon. Now let's understand. Before the war started, Ukraine was the fourth largest grain exporter in the world, which is something that was not really well understood up until a year or so ago by most people. And that meant that there were a large number of countries, especially in the Middle East, Africa, that had become particularly dependent on shipments from Ukraine. Yes, I mean the world grain market is a global market, but countries and firms and individuals even sign contracts with particular suppliers. Uh, Moreover, the World Food Program, which is a specialized agency of the United Nations, has become, or was up until recently, a significant user of grain from Ukraine for its programs. And its programs are always directed toward places that are in the most need, that are in crisis, whether it's a famine or a war or a civil insurrection or a pestilence or climate change or whatever. And so the World Food Program becomes a crucial supplier of support to countries that are in deep trouble. So you have all these dynamics working. Then the UN and Turkey negotiated a deal to allow grain shipments to leave Ukrainian ports to get into the global food supply chain. But it was ended. Last month, the agreement wound up, and the Russians refused to negotiate further on a new or an additional or an extended version of that. Instead, at this meeting, what they offered was I hesitate to say it this way, but sort of see two grocery stores next to each other on a busy street. And one of the grocery store owners keeps setting fire to the storage bins of the other one, and then says, "Well, you can't supply it, so I'll be nice to your former customers." That's hardly the way to do this. And what they offered instead was to supply grain to 5 or 6 favored nations and to offer some of it for free. But let's remember that back in that previous meeting, the Russians had grandly pronounced that they would quadruple their trade with Africa as a whole. And that, of course, hasn't happened. And the numbers that I see seem to indicate that Africa Russia trade has actually declined slightly over totals from that period. So the Russians were not as adroit as one would have expected. There are going to be some harsh conversations in the Russian foreign ministry over how this all played out, I suspect, over the next couple of weeks. Whose fault this was? How did this come to be the way it was? And most especially, how did Vladimir Putin become so embarrassed by this?
He obviously feels very snubbed by it, and perhaps this is his way of retaliating. I'll show you. X number of African ministers were meant to be attending, and the fact that so few attended was quite a snub to him. Let's also understand. Obviously, South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, and I think it was Musa Faki Mohammed from Egypt, were pretty strong in their views regarding the the distribution or the grain, the supplies of grain coming to Africa, because it is sorely needed here. If Putin takes such a hard stance on not supplying or supplying only a minimal amount of grain to Africa, what's the outcome going to be? I should imagine soaring food prices for us here in Africa. But what happens to all of that grain?
Well, a couple of things. Sorry, I've lost your sound. Uh, what's going to happen is that the prices, just as you say, the prices will go up. Uh, and I think initially when the shipping accord disappeared, prices went up close to 10% on the spot market, which is quite a jump. The Ukrainian grain, some of it has been destroyed, in fact, by Russian attacks on ports like Odessa in recent weeks as well. Um, all of that is going to contribute to uh, certain amounts of scarcity, spot scarcities perhaps. Now, I mean, let's remember, it isn't just the Ukraine that supplies grain to the world. Argentina is a grain exporter, has traditionally been so. Australia, the same thing. The United States, Canada, a number of other countries, smaller amounts. But Ukraine had uniquely managed to harness its extraordinarily fertile soils together with modern horticultural and agricultural methods, and to use all this in a tight network of supply because it was conveniently placed from Ukraine ports through the Black Sea and immediately into the Mediterranean and into the Middle East and the African supply chains. And so it's going to sting a little bit, and it's going to hurt you most if you have the least amount of money to spend on food.
It seems as if, obviously, the rising prices of the grain has done a wonder for Russian coffers, much needed revenue for them. How much longer do you believe Putin can hold out with this issue? And not too long ago, a couple of months ago, we do know that Erdogan from Turkey struck some sort of a deal with Russia regarding the Black Sea grain deal. Whatever happened to that? Why did that fall through? And lastly, my final question. I can't believe that many months on, we're still talking about the incursion into the Ukraine by the Russians. I think I did, as did the rest of the world, believe that it would be over in 2, 3, 4 months' time, 6 months' time, but didn't really believe it would hold out this long. What does the future look like? What is it going to take to have some sort of a peace treaty between those two countries, so that obviously things can almost stabilize in the rest of the world regarding food, regarding prices, regarding the destabilization of this war creating a ripple effect on the global community?
Well, let's go back to your first question. The grain deal that was in effect up until just a little while ago uh, was an outcome of the original ideas from the Turkish president, uh, and ultimately it was Turkey and the UN working jointly managed to get the Black Sea shipping corridor open, and that was deemed by most people to be a success, excuse me, on the part of Turkish diplomacy. As to your, and now of course it's fallen away again, and so people are going to have to scramble. Um, as regards your second point, um, what it has showed is that the Russian military was not nearly as capable or competent as people, many of them thought. Uh, Most of the Russian army is now standing army is now engaged in Ukraine. They're having to up the age limit for drafting people. They're continuing to give people who are convicts a choice: stay a convict or join the army,
Oh,
which is a mark of some desperation. And it also shows that a country desperate to defend itself, in which morale for the defense of the country is strong, and as long as it has access to weapons to defend itself, it's not easily defeated. Um, this leads you to the question of, will there be negotiations? The problem is the Ukrainian position on negotiations effectively is one of, fine, we can negotiate all kinds of things, but first the occupiers have to leave the areas that they've invaded and destroyed. Then we can talk about further discussions. We also going to have to talk about reparations eventually, and
mm,
who's going to pay for the rebuilding. That's not going to be an inconsiderable question eventually. Um, what I think no one wants to see is what is sometimes called a cold peace. That is, there's no definitive end, there's no real treaty, there is the most tentative of ceasefires, and a problem can result at almost a moment's notice. There can be a mistake by one side or the other, and then the whole thing starts all over again. A cold peace is very clearly what you don't want to achieve if you can possibly avoid it. As to how easily we will get beyond that, I don't know. It's going to be a long slog, I'm afraid, and that's a terrible thing to say. That's how I think it.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. I'd rather have a cold peace than a cold war that the whole world was subjugated to a while ago by the Russians. So there you have it. Till the next time, keep warm and go well. Thank you indeed, Brooks Spector. 9:42 News and Views on Salam Media. Our final interview for the morning will be with Farhana Haturani, and we're going to be welcoming her to the Salam Media team for the month of August, which of course is Women's Month.